Is there mother-in-law talk going on here? Is that what that's happening? Patty says it's not a family-friendly gospel, huh? Well, maybe not on first hearing, but let's see what we can do with it as we reflect upon it. You saw these images of that horrific fire in Lockport, that tire fire that was burning for, well, since Wednesday. Yesterday they said, the fire commissioner had said that it had been extinguished, and then about 2 hours later it had smoldered up again and they had to call in the recruits, or they had to call in forces again to put it out. It was just immense billows of smoke all over the neighborhood, all over that part of the city, just horrific. Fires can do that. Fires can be devastating. Fires can also be useful. Huh? We can use fires. I know you don't feel like this today, but remember, in just a few months, it's going to be February, and you'll be glad that your furnace is working. Huh? Or that when you come in, maybe you have a fireplace and you can settle down there with a book to stay warm and comfortable. Where would we be for cooking without fire? Well, I would be with the microwave. I'm limited to that. Ever since the hard-boiled egg incident 2 years ago on Holy Thursday, I put 2 pots of eggs, 15 eggs in each pot, onto the stove and came into the sacristy for 5 minutes, and then an hour later remembered the eggs. I went back to a kitchen filled with smoke and eggs all over the ceiling. Just then the alarm went off. I went and punched in the code and called the alarm company and said, "Don't send the fire trucks." They said, "It's too late." 3 of them came roaring down Main Street. Sister Jeremy went to the driveway and said, "Don't worry, it's only Father Jack in the kitchen." But they said, "We have to check anyway." So they came in, 3 firefighters, one with an axe, one with a heat detector, walking around the kitchen, and a woman standing there with her arms folded looking at me like, "You have to be the stupidest man in Buffalo." So since then, it's limited to the microwave and plastic knives. That's what I get to use in the kitchen. But for the rest of you, fire is needed for cooking or for baking, huh? Because you know what to do with it. So fire can be a good thing. Even forest fires, you know, with the extreme heat that we've been experiencing, we've seen those incredible forest fires in the Southwest and California and places like that. And we think how horrible, but scientists tell us that forest fires are necessary for new growth. In other words, it's only the intense heat of a forest fire that enables the pods to release their seeds so that they can fall to the ground and begin to germinate. Otherwise, they stay attached to the tree, sometimes for decades, and there's no new growth. So every forest apparently has to have some type of forest fire somewhere between every 50 and 100 years so that there can be new growth. Otherwise, there won't be anything new coming to that forest. So fire can be beneficial, and that's the kind of fire that Jesus is talking about in this gospel when he says, "I have come to set the earth on fire." And that fire, it can cause division. We see that division in the scriptures. We see the division in the first book where Jeremiah is thrown into the cistern. In that first reading, he's thrown into the cistern because they don't want to hear what he has to say in terms of God's message to Israel. So they throw him in there, and then others come and they take him out. There's division in that community. There's division for the second reading where we have this letter to the Hebrews. The Hebrews were those Jews who had heard the gospel, had been baptized and followed Christ, and that caused a division in their home. Because if their family wasn't baptized, they were then ostracized. They were thrown out of the synagogue. They were no longer considered part of the Jewish community, so their decision to follow Christ had those kinds of implications. And then, of course, we have Jesus talking about the division that living our faith can sometimes cause, even in the most intimate relationships, even in the most intimate of family relationships. And yet we are called to hear this gospel and to live by it. You've heard the phrase, I'm sure, fire in the belly, huh? Somebody who is so passionate about something, huh? We see that in the university students that come here. Now, not maybe in the freshmen. They have that deer in the headlights look, huh? They're coming here not quite sure what's the next move is. But the graduate students, that's something else, huh? They come here for medical school, or they come here for dental school, or they come here for architecture on this campus, and they'll spend, hours and hours and hours in the lab or in their studio. They'll pull an all-nighter, the architect students, getting their projects ready. They're so passionate about learning their field. They have that fire in their belly. Who else do we see that in? We see that in first responders, huh? Those who come down, roaring down the street in their fire trucks or their police cars or their ambulance, almost as if it's their first call. They're so focused. We can see that in those serving in the military who put themselves in harm's way for our sake, for the sake of their nation. Perhaps you see that in your parenting or in your child's parenting of your grandchildren, that passion, that wanting to do the best, create the best home, create the best learning environment. That's the kind of passion that Jesus is talking about. That's the kind of fire, a fire that liberates, a fire that creates, a fire that nurtures, a fire that gives life. That's what Jesus is calling us to. Not that our religion is an empty ritual. It can't be that. It can't be just that we come here on a Sunday. You don't come here on a Sunday just to kill an hour of time. You come here on Sunday so that you can be set on fire. Just like those apostles in the upper room on Pentecost when the Holy Spirit came, and what does it say in Luke's Acts of the Apostles? Tongues as a fire rested on their head. And they went out and they spoke. They didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know where it would lead, but they couldn't help themselves. And that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be ignited today with this same Holy Spirit and sent forth. Our Holy Father is telling us this over and over again, what we as the church must be. He had this to say. He said, I see clearly that the thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. It needs nearness, proximity. I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has high cholesterol or about his level of blood sugars. You have to heal the wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds, he repeats, and you have to start from the ground up. Now listen to this, because this is about the divisions, he said. The church has sometimes locked itself up in small things, in small-minded rules, and the ministers of the church must be ministers of mercy above all. In other words, the divisions that come to the church are not because we're setting up hoops or walls or barricades, but because we're living the gospel with passion, and some people perhaps can't accept that. Not that we reject them, but that they reject us. That's where the division comes. I believe in God, the Pope says, not a Catholic God. There is no Catholic God. There is God, and I believe in Jesus Christ, his incarnation. Instead of being just a church that welcomes and receives by keeping the doors open, let us try to be a church that finds new roads to those who have quit or are indifferent. In other words, we can't be the church when we're just here. We're here so that we can be the church in the world. A week ago Friday, the Olympic flame was brought into the stadium in Brazil. It had been carried by 12,000 runners across the world to that place. And it was brought there, just as we heard in that second reading from the Hebrews. We're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Let us rid ourselves of every burden and sin that clings to us and persevere in running the race that lies before us. They ran the race and brought that fire there, and the cauldron was lit, and it burns as a sign of unity, a sign of oneness, a sign of hope for the world, a sign of equality, a sign of all the positive things that so many other voices are calling against. Well, sisters and brothers, we do that here every Easter. We light the Easter fire, and then we light your candles, and then we send you forth. Not just 12,000, but millions of Christians are gathering this day around the Lord's table to be set fire with hope and joy and healing and promise for the world. So go forth carrying that torch, not in your hands, but in your heart, and set the world on fire. Let's stand and pray.